So let's bring in former foreign policy advisor to the Obama campaign, David Tafuri, former deputy assistant to President Trump, Fred Fleitz, and former advisor to Lady Margaret Thatcher, Nile Gardiner. Good to have all of you here with us tonight.
Great to be here.
Fred, I want to start with you. There's so much talk about war. What has happened tonight does not necessarily have to take us in that direction.
No, that's exactly right. We know that Iran's missiles are pretty accurate. In fact, Joby Warwick, who writes for the Washington Post, wrote a column that will come out in tomorrow's paper, how quantum change in missiles has made Iran a far more dangerous foe. Their ballistic missiles, their cruise missiles, their drones actually are fairly accurate. They did not hit these facilities because they didn't want to. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't an act of ineptitude. But you know what it was? It was a fear that they did not want to provoke the president into a retaliation that would be devastating. This is a show of force for domestic consumption, and I think Iran wants to move on, and I think that's what the president will want to do too.
Now, the events of the last couple of weeks, including the decision to take out General Qasem Soleimani, what message does that send around the world? I know at one point, I believe it was Secretary Pompeo who said, we wish the Europeans were a little bit more helpful at this moment. And correct me if I'm wrong on that. I think it was him who said that. But the world has a role in watching this whole thing as it plays out. What's the message?
Well, I think the message the United States clearly sent to Iran and every terrorist regime in the world is that the United States will hold barbaric terrorist dictatorships to account. And the United States will take action against terrorist regimes. And it's unfortunate that we have not seen strong support for the US position coming from key European allies, including, for example, the French and the Germans. The British, I think, have been by far the most supportive in Europe so far. And the British Defence Secretary, in fact, earlier this week indicated that the UK would potentially take part in military action against Iran if necessary. But the overall response from Europe has been the typical sort of appeasement approach that is often taken by European capitals, hugely disappointing, not that different to the approach taken by a lot of liberal politicians here in the United States. We need to project strength and resolve in the face of monstrous evil. I think that President Trump has done so spectacularly. We need to continue that approach, and we do need to send a clear message not only to Tehran but to dictatorships across the world that they will be held to account by the US and the free world.
David, not so easy to thread that needle in this region. There are so many competing interests and factions, sometimes aligned with each other, for example, in going after ISIS, other times diametrically opposed and taking each other out. I mean, how difficult is it to create any sense of peace or to calm this whole thing down, de-escalate in that region?
It's going to be very difficult. You know, Iraq is sort of the punching bag here, right? They lost some officials when we struck Qasem Soleimani, also bad guys like Qasem Soleimani, but they were killed. And now Iran has done these missile strikes on Iraq at bases where there are U.S. forces. Apparently, U.S. forces, luckily, have not been injured. There are no casualties so far, but maybe Iraqis have been injured. Iraq is sort of stuck in the middle. Iraq's parliament voted to remove the U.S. military, which is very provocative, but the prime minister of Iraq has not acted on that yet. We have about 6,000 troops in Iraq. We do want to keep them there. We have interests there. We want to prevent ISIS from coming back to Iraq, and we want to continue the training mission with Iraq. So Iraq is stuck in the middle. Iran has done this provocative attack, but it seems like it's just fireworks because they didn't actually do significant damage. But the sun has just risen in Iraq. We're getting a damage assessment, and we'll know more soon.
Well, and Fred, when we carried out the strike on Soleimani, it was in Iraq, and there were a number of officials and people who came forward who said, we have sovereign territory. This is our nation. You can't just come in here and carry out these hits. Is that something you think they genuinely felt? Did they need to say that publicly in order to protect themselves because there are so many competing interests, like sharing a border with Iran? Was there more to it?
I think we always get a response like this when the U.S. takes action like this in a sovereign country. But Soleimani is a terrorist leader. We know his history in launching terrorist attacks against the United States. More terrorist attacks were coming. It's just amazing that many in the media and in Congress are saying that it was wrong for the president to kill a terrorist leader because his terrorist state might respond with terrorism. And that doesn't add up. And that type of thinking amounts to weakness. It's very destabilizing.
Well, and now we know in that region, this has gone on for decades. This is not a new, I mean, yes, a lot has happened in the last couple of weeks between the U.S. and Iran, but this is something that has gone on for decades. It's important not to ignore the history here.
Absolutely. And I think that what's different today is that you have a U.S. administration in place that is actually willing to take action against a regime such as Iran. And a huge contrast with the appeasement approach taken by the Obama administration. The whole Obama approach towards Iran was an absolute disaster. The Iran nuclear agreement, the JCPOA, is a disaster. And this administration has decided to withdraw from that agreement to take firm action against Iran. And this is absolutely the right approach. And I think the only language that the Iranian dictatorship understands is strength, determination, and resolve. We have to project that at every opportunity against what is an extremely barbaric regime with American and British blood on its hands. And there are consequences for these kinds of actions. Certainly the Iranians are being held to full account right now. We have to increase that maximum pressure on this regime at every single opportunity.
And David, I know that you were an advisor within the Obama sphere, and there are a number of people who were part of putting together that Iran nuclear deal who have now traced everything back to say the moment that President Trump pulled out, it triggered all of this. His supporters say that's just not so, that strategy didn't work. What's your response?
I mean, I think the truth is somewhere in the middle. I wouldn't say that Trump's approach to Iran has been successful. It's not successful. It's a mess, and there's no real strategy. But I also wouldn't be I'm not going to criticize the decision to kill Qasem Soleimani. Qasem Soleimani was a leader of terrorist efforts. He's responsible for killing many Americans. The world is better without him. But what are we going to do now? And it's not at all clear from President Trump. We have maximum pressure on sanctions. We have no diplomatic channels open at all. We have no offer to Iran on how it can resolve this. There's no approach to fixing this diplomatically. And it's just likely that we're going to continue to escalate because it's just a tit for tat. I do think Iran is going to do more to retaliate. They may take a little bit more time, but we have to be ready for Iran to do more, and we have to get a strategy together.
Yeah, and we'll hear from the president in the morning and hopefully get more on all of those points. Gentlemen, thank you all for being with us tonight. Appreciate it.
Thank you.